Welcome back, and thank you for tuning in to HK Cheating Stories. We appreciate each and every one of you joining us. Where in the world are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. Now, let's get the story started. My name is Ethan Graves, and 10 years ago, I died. At least, that's what the world believed. My wife wept at my funeral. My brother stood beside her, a pillar of strength. The perfect grieving family. But it was all a lie, because they were the ones who tried to kill me. And now, after a decade lost in the shadows, I've returned. Not just to reclaim my life, but to destroy the people who stole it. They think their secrets are buried. They think they've won. But they forgot one simple truth. The dead don't stay buried forever. I woke up gasping for air, my chest heaving like I'd been drowning. My throat burned, my head pounded, and my entire body felt like it had been shattered and glued back together the wrong way. The ceiling above me was white, sterile, unfamiliar. The hum of machines surrounded me, beeping in a rhythm that made my pulse quicken. I tried to move. Nothing. My limbs felt like lead, useless, foreign. Panic surged through me. Where the hell was I? A shadow moved in the corner of my eye. Footsteps. A man leaned over me, his face coming into focus, middle-aged, dressed in a white coat, eyes sharp, but laced with something sympathy. "Mr. Smith," he said gently. "Mr. Smith?" I blinked, my dry tongue sticking to the roof of my mouth. That wasn't my name. My name was. My heart lurched. What was my name? I tried to speak, but my throat refused. The doctor must have seen the confusion in my eyes. He placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "You're safe," he said. "You've been unconscious for a long time. Just take it easy." I swallowed painfully and forced out a single word. "Where?" The doctor glanced at the nurse beside him, then back to me. "St. Jude's Medical Center. You were in a coma." Coma. The word sent a chill through me. I tried to sit up, but my muscles betrayed me. The nurse pressed me back down gently. "How long?" I rasped. The doctor hesitated, flipping through the clipboard at the foot of my bed. Then, with a steady voice, he said the words that shattered my world. 10 years. The room spun. The walls closed in. 10 years. That was impossible. It had only been. Memories crashed into me like a flood. My wife Madeline, my daughter Sophie, my home. I was a cop. I was happy. And then it hit me. The lottery. The betrayal. Ryan. My brother's face seared into my mind like a branding iron. His smirk. His arrogance. The way he stood too close to Madeline when he thought I wasn't looking. And then, pain. The gunshot. The darkness. I clenched my fists. My hands trembled. "No," I whispered. The doctor misunderstood. "I know this is overwhelming, but your body has healed well. Your memory may take time, but—" "No," I interrupted, my voice hoarse, raw. My chest rose and fell in ragged breaths. I needed answers. I turned my head toward the small TV mounted on the wall. The news was on, muted, a political debate in progress. A well-dressed man stood behind a podium, speaking passionately to a crowd. The camera zoomed in on his face. My blood turned to ice. It was Ryan. A decade older, hair graying at the temples, wearing a tailored suit that reeked of power. My brother. The man who had stolen everything from me. And standing beside him, Madeline. I barely recognized her. She was thinner, her once warm smile now a polished, political smirk. But there was no mistaking her. And then my gaze shifted. Standing slightly behind them was a young woman, poised, beautiful, with familiar eyes that sent a dagger straight through my heart. Sophie, my little girl, now grown, a stranger to me. The banner at the bottom of the screen read, "Ryan Carter announces candidacy for state senate," with wife Madeline and daughter Sophie by his side. A sharp ringing filled my ears. My breath caught in my throat. He had taken it all. My wife, my child, my life. And now? Now he wanted more. I felt my pulse pounding in my skull. Rage clawed its way up my throat. My hands clenched the hospital sheets, nails digging into my palms. The doctor's voice faded into the background. The machines beeped faster, warning of my escalating heart rate. But I didn't care. I was supposed to be dead. They thought I was gone. But I wasn't. And now, I was coming back. For all of them. The television screen burned into my brain like an open wound. Ryan. Madeline. Sophie. The life that had been stolen from me paraded across the screen, polished and untouchable. My pulse pounded in my ears, drowning out the beeping of the hospital monitors. I forced my body to move, muscles stiff and weak from years of neglect. Every movement felt like dragging myself through wet cement, but I didn't care. I had to get up. I wasn't supposed to be alive. They thought they had buried me. Now, I was digging my way out. The doctor noticed my struggle. "Mr. Smith, you need rest." "My name," I croaked, gripping the bed rail, "is not Smith." The name felt foreign, wrong. I wasn't John Smith. I was Ethan Carter, a soldier, a cop, a father, and they had taken everything from me. The doctor exchanged glances with the nurse. "You've been through extreme trauma. We can discuss everything once you've recovered more." I gritted my teeth. "Tell me everything. Now." The doctor hesitated. "You suffered a severe gunshot wound to the chest. You were found barely alive in what was ruled a home invasion gone wrong." "Home invasion." I let out a hollow laugh. "That's what they called it." He continued. "Your injuries were catastrophic, but you were stabilized. However, you fell into a coma. No one claimed you. No family came forward. The hospital transferred your case to the state, and after several years, you were declared legally dead. A body was buried under your name. Declared dead. Forgotten. Erased." I clenched my fists, a slow, seething fury boiling under my skin. Ryan had won. He had my wife, my daughter, my life. And he hadn't even looked back. But someone had been looking out for me. "Who paid for this?" I asked, gesturing to the hospital bed, the machines keeping me alive. The doctor frowned. "Your bills have been covered by an offshore account. We were never able to trace the benefactor." I felt a flicker of recognition. Ben, the only man I had ever trusted with my money. I forced my breath to slow, gripping onto that single, desperate thread. If Ben had been watching over me, it meant that not everything had been lost. I needed to get out of here. I needed answers. 2 weeks later, the first time I stood, I almost collapsed. My legs were thin, weak, useless from years of atrophy. The nurses helped me through physical therapy, guiding my broken body back to life. But the fire inside me was stronger than any weakness in my limbs. Every painful step I took was a promise. I wasn't just regaining my strength. I was coming back for revenge. When I was finally released, they handed me a small bag of donated clothes. A loose-fitting hoodie, faded jeans, worn sneakers. Nothing special, nothing that resembled the man I used to be. I caught my reflection in the hospital's glass doors before stepping out. I barely recognized myself. My face had changed. The doctors had performed reconstructive surgery after the gunshot. My cheekbones were sharper. A faint scar ran along my jawline. My eyes, once full of fire, were shadowed with something darker. I was a ghost, a man that no longer existed. Perfect. Stepping outside, the world felt different. The air smelled cleaner. The city had changed. People walked past me, oblivious, busy with lives that had moved on without me. A cab pulled up to the curb, and I climbed in. The driver didn't even look at me. "Where to?" I hesitated. There was only one place I could go. "Take me to Harper Financial." Ben's office, downtown. Ben Harper was a man who lived in the shadows, always 3 steps ahead of the game. If anyone could tell me what had happened, it was him. I stepped into the sleek, glass-paneled office. A young receptionist greeted me with a forced corporate smile. "Do you have an appointment?" I ignored her and walked straight past, pushing open the doors to the main office. Ben looked up from his desk. For a moment, he just stared. His hand froze mid-motion over a stack of papers. His face paled. "Holy shit." He stood slowly, his eyes raking over me like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. "Ethan." His voice was barely above a whisper. I gave him a hard look. "Not anymore, apparently." Ben let out a breath, running a hand through his graying hair. He looked older, sharper, but he was still the same man who had been my friend since the academy. "I never thought I'd see you again," he admitted. I sat across from him. "Tell me everything." Ben exhaled and leaned back, lacing his fingers together. "You're not gonna like it. Try me." He studied me for a long moment, then pulled out a folder from his desk. He slid it across the table. I flipped it open. The first page hit me like a punch to the gut. Madeline Carter, spouse of Ryan Carter. I turned the next page. Sophie Carter, daughter of Ryan Carter. I gritted my teeth. My own child was legally listed as his. The next page was worse. Ryan Carter, state Senate candidate. The headline beneath it sent ice through my veins. Carter family poised for political dynasty. I clenched the folder so hard my knuckles turned white. Ben leaned forward. "I've been keeping an eye on them, watching from the sidelines. But I wasn't sure what to do, man. You were gone. I met his gaze, my voice quiet, deadly. I'm not gone, Ben. I closed the folder and looked up. I'm just getting started. I sat in Ben's office, gripping the folder so tightly I thought the paper might tear. My wife, my daughter, my brother. They had rewritten history, erasing me from it entirely. I lifted my gaze to Ben, my old friend, the only man who hadn't abandoned me. His eyes were filled with something between guilt and relief. How long have you known? My voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. Ben sighed, rubbing his temples. Since the moment they buried the wrong man in your grave. A sharp, cold laugh escaped my throat. That was considerate of them. He shook his head. You don't get it, Ethan. They didn't just take your family. They tried to kill you. They left you for dead. And when you didn't die, someone pulled the right strings to make sure you stayed gone. I leaned forward, my jaw tight. Who? Ben hesitated. That's the part that's still a mystery. The official story was a home invasion. But I've seen the footage, man. The scene was staged. Your house was ransacked after you were shot. No valuables were taken. No forced entry. This wasn't random. My fingers drummed against the table. And Ryan. Ben let out a slow breath. He played the grieving brother perfectly. Said all the right things to the press. Held a funeral. Even managed to shed a few tears. And then, 6 months later, he married Madeline. My stomach twisted. 6 months. Not even a full year before they moved on like I had never existed. What about Sophie? I asked, my voice quieter now. Ben's face softened. She was 8, man. She didn't understand. But from what I gathered, Ryan made sure she never questioned it. She was told you were killed by a burglar. That was the end of it. I closed my eyes for a brief moment, forcing back the rage bubbling beneath my skin. Ben leaned back in his chair. So, what's your plan? I met his gaze. Find out who pulled the trigger. Find out who buried me. And then, I clenched my jaw. I tear their world apart. Ben gave me a slow nod. Then let's get started. The first step was surveillance. Ben had been watching from a distance for years, but now we needed to get closer. We needed eyes on Ryan, Madeline, and Sophie. We needed to know their schedules, their habits, their weaknesses. I wasn't the man I used to be. I couldn't just walk up to them and demand answers. But I could hunt them from the shadows. Ben set me up with everything I needed. A new identity, a burner phone, access to financial accounts I never even knew I had. The offshore money he had been safeguarding for me had grown into a small fortune. That money was going to fund my revenge. First stop, Ben said as we sat in his car outside a towering glass building in the heart of downtown. Carter and Associates. My brother's law firm. The place where Madeline worked. The firm that had bought my wife's loyalty and buried me in the past. I pulled my hood over my head and stepped out of the car. I wasn't walking into the building. Not yet. But I needed to see it. To feel the weight of my old life pressing down on me. The name Carter and Associates was emblazoned in gold lettering above the entrance. I clenched my fists. My name should have been there. I watched as men in suits and women in designer dresses strode in and out, important, powerful, oblivious to the rotting foundation beneath their empire. And then I saw her. Madeline. She walked out of the building like she owned the world, dressed in a sharp navy blue dress, heels clicking against the pavement. Her hair was styled to perfection, her makeup flawless. But I saw it. The lines at the corners of her eyes. The tightness in her jaw. The exhaustion hidden beneath the polished exterior. She was living her perfect life. And yet, something told me she wasn't as untouchable as she appeared. I followed her, blending into the crowd. Not too close, just enough to see where she was going. She walked 2 blocks, stopping outside a cafe. A private one, the kind that catered to the elite. She stepped inside, and I waited across the street, watching. 5 minutes later, Ryan arrived. My blood ran cold as I saw him for the first time in 10 years. He had aged well. A little grayer, a little broader, but still the same arrogant bastard I remembered. He carried himself like a man who had never lost a fight. Because the only real fight he had ever been in, he made sure I never walked away from. They sat together at a secluded table, deep in conversation. I couldn't hear them, but I didn't need to. Their body language told me everything. Madeline was tense. Ryan was trying to reassure her. Something was wrong. Ben's voice crackled in my earpiece. Got a lip reader on standby. Give me 5 minutes. I smirked. Always prepared. Ben chuckled. That's why you keep me around. I waited, watching their interaction. Ryan reached across the table, placing a hand on Madeline's. She flinched, just slightly. Interesting. A moment later, Ben's voice returned. Got it. What are they saying? Ben exhaled. Madeline is panicking about something. She keeps saying, it's starting again. I narrowed my eyes. Starting again? Yeah. Ryan is trying to calm her down, telling her it's just some prank or someone stirring up old rumors. I clenched my jaw. They were scared. And they should be. Ben continued. One more thing. She just asked him, what if Ethan isn't dead? I felt my pulse spike. Ryan's response was instant. He laughed, and then he said something that made my blood turn to ice. Even if he were alive, he'd never come back. He's weak. He's nothing. And if he ever does, I'll make sure this time he stays dead. I exhaled slowly, steadying my hands. Ryan thought he had won. He thought I was nothing. But he had made one mistake. He should have finished the job. Ryan's words echoed in my head. Even if he were alive, he'd never come back. He's weak. He's nothing. And if he ever does, I'll make sure this time he stays dead. He thought I was gone, that I was buried, erased, forgotten. But ghosts don't stay buried forever. I pulled away from the cafe, my hands curled into fists as I walked back to Ben's car. My blood was boiling, but I forced myself to stay focused. This wasn't about rage. Not yet. This was about control. About making them feel the fear I had lived with for a decade. Ben was waiting for me in the car, one hand resting on the steering wheel, the other flipping through a file. He didn't say anything at first, just let me sit in silence as I processed what I had just heard. Finally, he spoke. You ready for phase 1? I let out a slow breath, forcing my heartbeat to steady. Yeah. Ben tossed the file onto my lap. Then let's ruin their sleep. Step 1. Make them feel me. People like Ryan and Madeline thrived on control. They built their perfect lives by controlling everything around them. People, money, power. Take that away, and they fall apart. The first move was simple. Remind them I existed. Ben had already prepped everything. A set of burner phones, voice modulation software, and a list of locations tied to their lives, places they felt safe. I started with Madeline. That night, as she slept in the mansion I had paid for, I made the first call. The phone rang twice before she answered, her voice groggy but irritated. Hello. I took a breath, letting my voice distort through the modulator. Then, in a whisper, I spoke 2 words. Miss me. A sharp inhale. Silence. Then, click. She hung up. I smiled. 3 minutes later, I sent her a photo. It was a grainy shot of her standing in front of her office that morning, looking over her shoulder. I knew she would recognize it for what it was. I was watching. Ryan was next. For him, I needed something louder. The next morning, I sent a text. A single image. It was an old photo, one from my wedding. Ryan was my best man, standing beside me with that perfect, fake grin of his. Beneath it, I added a caption. Some things should never be stolen. Ben called me 15 minutes later. You just ruined his day. I smirked. Good. Ryan had 3 missed calls from Madeline within the first 5 minutes. He ignored the first 2, but by the third, he answered. We had tapped his phone, so I listened as he spoke. What the hell is this? His voice was sharp, defensive. I don't know, Madeline whispered, clearly shaken. But I got a call last night. Someone whispered. Ryan cut her off. It's a prank. Someone messing with us. Madeline wasn't convinced. No, Ryan. This feels different. Ryan sighed. We'll handle it. I could almost hear the way his jaw clenched. He hated not being in control. I was just getting started. Step 2. Let him know he's hunted. Ryan's schedule was predictable. Mornings at the office. Lunch meetings. Afternoons at various political events. He was always surrounded. So, I made sure he felt alone. 2 days after the first call, he walked into his law firm like usual. Smiling, shaking hands, pretending to be untouchable. Then he saw it. A package. No return address. Placed right on his desk. He hesitated before opening it, his fingers stiff. Inside, there was a single object. A bullet. Underneath it, a note. I never miss. It was a reference to something only he and I would understand, the night of my wedding. The night I had warned him that if he ever touched my wife, I'd blow his balls off from 1,000 yards. Ryan's breathing was audible through the phone tap. Get security in here. Now, I could hear the fear creeping in. Good. Step 3. Burn his house of cards. Ben had been busy. He had spent years gathering evidence. Photos, financial records, secret dealings. Now it was time to use them. That night, I made another call. This time, to a journalist, Elizabeth Grant, one of the few reporters who actually cared about exposing corruption. I kept my voice calm, professional. "I have a story for you." "Who is this?" she asked. "A friend. Someone who knows exactly what kind of man Ryan Carter is." A pause. "I'm listening." I gave her enough to hook her. A glimpse of Ryan's illegal dealings, his connections to corrupt businessmen, the quiet payoffs he had made over the years. Then I said, "If you want more, meet me in person." She hesitated. "How do I know I can trust you?" I smiled. "Because I hate him more than you do." The next morning, headlines erupted. State Senate candidate Ryan Carter under fire for corruption allegations. Ben called me, laughing. "You really went for the throat." "This is only the beginning," I said, watching the news from my motel room. Ryan was in full damage control mode, denying everything. Madeline, meanwhile, looked like she had seen a ghost. And Sophie, she was caught in the middle. I clenched my jaw. She was the only reason I hadn't gone further. Not yet. But if Ryan thought he could silence me, if he thought he could erase me again, he had no idea what was coming next. Ryan Carter was losing control. I could see it in his eyes during every TV interview, hear it in the tightness of his voice when he dismissed the allegations as political sabotage. But I knew better. He was cracking. The first scandal had barely settled before I dropped another bomb. This time, it wasn't about money. It was about his private life. Madeline, the affair, the lies. I sent 3 emails. One to a gossip columnist, one to a political blogger, and one to a local news station. Subject line, "You missed a story." Attached, photos. Ryan and Madeline sneaking into a hotel together, a full 6 months before my funeral. Screenshots of text messages, pulled from a cloud account Ben had hacked years ago. Messages filled with desire, deception, and plans. "Madeline, I can't keep lying to him." "Ryan, you won't have to for much longer." And the final nail in the coffin, an audio recording. Madeline's voice, soft, almost guilty. "I love you, Ryan, but what if he finds out?" Ryan's response was pure venom. "He won't. And even if he does, he won't be around for long." I imagined Ryan sitting at his desk, scrolling through news headlines, watching his life burn in real time. I could almost taste his panic. By midday, Madeline's office had been swarmed by reporters. Her colleagues whispered behind her back. Ryan was forced to cancel his press events, a move that only made the media chase him harder. That evening, Ben sent me a video clip from a local news station. Madeline, outside her office, surrounded by reporters. "Mrs. Carter, were you having an affair with Ryan while your husband was still alive? Did you know about the financial scandals? And then, do you have any comment on the allegations that your husband's death wasn't a burglary gone wrong?" That's when she snapped. I watched as her composed mask shattered. Her voice trembled. "Who? Who told you that?" A reporter pressed forward. "Is it true? Was Ethan's death planned?" For the briefest second, pure terror flickered in her eyes. Then, without another word, she shoved past them and ran. I turned to Ben. "She's breaking." Ben smirked. "Not just her." He tossed me his phone. "Listen to this." A recorded phone call. "Ryan, you need to get your shit together." "Madeline, you don't understand. He's coming for us, Ryan." "Ryan, he's dead, Maddie. This is just some asshole trying to mess with us." Madeline, low voice. "Then why does it feel like him?" Silence. "Ryan, you're losing it. We need to focus." Madeline exhaled shakily. "Sophie's asking questions." That made me pause. "Sophie, my daughter. The one thing Ryan couldn't control." Ben raised an eyebrow. "That change anything?" I clenched my jaw. "No." Lying to myself. That night, I parked outside Sophie's university dorm. I wasn't going to talk to her. Not yet. But I needed to see her. She walked out of the building around 10 p.m., her dark hair tucked under a hoodie, her backpack slung over one shoulder. She was taller now. Older. Not the little girl I remembered. My stomach twisted. She stopped near a bench, pulled out her phone, and called someone. A moment later, Madeline picked up. I connected my earpiece to the bug Ben had planted on her phone. "Sophie, Mom, I need the truth." Silence. "Madeline, Sophie, it's late." "Sophie, no? No more bullshit. Who sent me that email?" I stiffened. "Email? Madeline." Panicked. "What email?" "Sophie, a message from an unknown sender. They sent me links to news articles. About Dad. About you. About Uncle Ryan. And pictures. Pictures of you two together. Before he died." Madeline was breathing fast. Sophie, listen to me. Sophie, did you cheat on him? A long, painful pause. Madeline, yes. I closed my eyes, gripping the steering wheel. Sophie's breath hitched. And the burglary? Madeline hesitated. Too long. Sophie, Mom? Madeline. Barely a whisper. I don't know what happened. Liar. Sophie wasn't stupid. I could hear it in her voice, the way her world was shattering in real time. Sophie, was it Uncle Ryan? Madeline choked on her next breath. Sophie, oh my God. It was him. He killed Dad, didn't he? Madeline's silence was all the confirmation she needed. Sophie hung up. She sat there, phone clenched in her hands, shaking. And I sat in my car, heart pounding, torn between two instincts. One, to go to her, to tell her the truth. The other, to finish what I started. To bury Ryan Carter once and for all. Ryan Carter was running out of places to hide. The media storm was relentless. Scandals, accusations, whispers of murder. His empire, the one he built on my corpse, was crumbling. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. He needed to feel it. The walls closing in. The fear creeping under his skin. The slow, agonizing realization that his perfect life was over. That night, I stood across the street from his house, watching through binoculars as he stormed around his office, phone pressed to his ear. Ben had tapped the call. Play it for me, I whispered. Through my earpiece, I heard Ryan's voice, shaking, desperate. Ryan, I don't care what it costs. I want this shut down. The media, the reporters, the goddamn rumors. Bury it all. Voice on the other end. That's complicated. Ryan slammed something against his desk. Do your job. The voice hesitated. There's talk of reopening the case. Silence. Cold. Heavy. Then, Ryan, that case is closed. No, I thought, gripping the binoculars tighter. It was about to blow wide open. Sophie hadn't spoken to Madeline since that night. I knew because I was watching. She barely ate, barely slept. When she wasn't in class, she was glued to her laptop, scrolling through articles about me. About the scandal. About Ryan. She was looking for the truth, and I was about to give it to her. At midnight, I sent her a message. No sender. No subject. Just a link. A video file. She hesitated before clicking, but when she did, everything changed. I watched from my car as she sat in her dorm room, laptop screen glowing in the dark, face twisted in horror as she saw it for the first time. The footage. Ryan. Madeline. My father-in-law. Plotting. Laughing. Planning my murder like it was just another business deal. Then, the shooting. The moment Ryan pulled the trigger. The moment Madeline turned away. The moment they left me for dead. I saw Sophie's hands fly to her mouth, her body shaking, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. She screamed. Not just a cry of pain. A sound of betrayal. Of fury. And just like that, my daughter was one of us. She showed up at Sophie's dorm the next day, looking like she hadn't slept in weeks. I had bugged Sophie's room in advance. Madeline, baby, please. Let me explain. Sophie. Cold, unreadable, go ahead. Madeline swallowed. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. Sophie narrowed her eyes. Like what, Mom? Like a murder? Madeline flinched. Sophie pressed forward. You knew. You knew he was going to kill Dad, and you let it happen. Madeline grabbed Sophie's hand. I was scared. Sophie yanked away. No, you were selfish. And you know what? I hope you're scared now, too. Madeline's face fell apart. Sophie, please. Sophie shook her head. Get out. And just like that, Madeline lost her only daughter. Ryan must have felt the shift, felt the suffocating pressure of everything slipping through his fingers. Because that night, he called Madeline. I was already listening. Ryan, we need to talk. Now. Madeline. Shaky breath. It's over, Ryan. Ryan's voice went ice cold. Meet me at the house. She hesitated. Why? Ryan. Because if I'm going down, you're going down with me. I sat up straight. Ben, listening in, muttered. That sounds like a setup. I clenched my jaw. We're not letting her walk into that house alone. Ben glanced at me. You sure? After everything she did. I thought about it. About the betrayal. About the bullet that should have ended me. But more than anything, I thought about Sophie. She had already lost one parent. I wasn't going to let Ryan take the other. Not before I was done with him. Madeline arrived at Ryan's house at 10:45 p.m. I was already there. Watching. Waiting. She knocked on the door. Ryan opened it. Eyes wild, paranoid. He yanked her inside. I slipped through the side entrance, silent as a shadow. In the living room, Ryan was pacing. Madeline, why did you call me here? Ryan. Low, dangerous, because I need to clean this up. My muscles tensed. I could see it, the gun hidden in his waistband. He was about to silence her. So I stepped into the light. Ryan froze. His breath hitched. For the first time in 10 years, we stood face to face. His lips parted. His eyes went wide. Disbelief. Fear. Ethan. I smiled. Miss me. Ryan Carter was frozen. His face, once so smug, so untouchable, was pale as death. For 10 years, he had lived free, built his life on my grave, convinced the past was buried forever. And now his ghost was standing in his living room. I took a slow step forward, watching the sweat bead on his forehead. He swallowed hard. His mouth opened, closed, trying to make sense of the impossible. Finally, his voice cracked. Ethan. I smirked. You were expecting the Grim Reaper, weren't you? Madeline gasped behind him, her hands shaking. Her eyes darted between us, her mind breaking apart at the realization. I turned to her, my voice laced with bitterness. Didn't see this coming, did you, Maddie? She staggered back, shaking her head. How are you alive? I ignored her. My eyes were locked on him. The liar. The thief. The murderer. And now, the dead man walking. Ryan took a step back, his hand twitching toward his waistband. The gun. I cocked my head. Really, Ryan? You think that's going to help you? His fingers froze. You think you can kill me twice? I stepped closer. Go ahead. Pull the trigger. Silence. His hand stayed still. Because he knew. I wasn't a scared man in his living room anymore. I was something else. Something far worse. His voice came out strangled. I saw you die. No, I took another step. You left me for dead. But you should have made sure. His breath hitched. You put a bullet in my chest. You stood over me and watched my blood pool on the floor. And then you and Maddie played the grieving widow and brother. Madeline choked on a sob. Ryan didn't even spare her a glance. He was too busy drowning in his own fear. I smirked. But here's the thing, Ryan. The past doesn't stay buried. Not forever. I reached into my pocket. He flinched like I was about to pull a weapon. But it wasn't a gun. It was my phone. And with one click, the room filled with sound. Ryan's voice. He won't be around for long. Madeline's voice. Ryan, I love you, but what if he finds out? Ryan's laughter. Then we handle it. His eyes widened in horror. The color drained from his face. Oh, don't look so surprised, I taunted. You should know by now, secrets don't stay hidden forever. He lunged. I was ready. He reached for my phone, tried to destroy the evidence, but I sidestepped him. His momentum threw him off balance, and he slammed into the coffee table. Glass shattered. He groaned in pain. Madeline screamed. But I wasn't done. I crouched next to him, grabbed his collar, and yanked him up to face me. You took everything from me. My voice was deadly calm. And now it's my turn. Sirens wailed in the distance. Ryan's eyes darted to the window. His escape route was gone. He knew it. No, 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 he muttered, shaking his head. You don't understand. You don't. I cut him off. Oh, I understand perfectly. You killed your brother and stole his life. You took his wife, his daughter, his money, and you thought you'd get away with it. His breath came in short, panicked gasps. I leaned in. You didn't. The front door burst open. Flashlights. Heavy boots pounding against the floor. Hands where we can see them. I raised my hands. Ryan, shaking, did the same. A cop rushed forward and grabbed him, twisting his arms behind his back. Ryan Carter, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and obstruction of justice. The words rang in my ears. The cuffs clicked shut around Ryan's wrists. For the first time in his miserable, pathetic life, he wasn't in control anymore. Madeline collapsed onto the couch, sobbing. A cop approached me. Sergeant Taggart. I had known him once. He squinted at me, like he was trying to place my face. Sir, we'll need you to come with us to answer a few questions. I nodded. Of course. Ryan screamed as they dragged him out of the house. Sophie was waiting. Her face was unreadable. Her eyes locked on Ryan as he was stuffed into the back of a squad car. And then, slowly, she turned to me. For the first time since I came back from the dead, our eyes met. I swallowed hard. Her lip quivered. Her voice was barely a whisper. Dad. My daughter's voice was the only thing I could hear. Soft. Uncertain. A single word that carried 10 years of pain. Dad. My heart clenched. I had imagined this moment for years, but now that it was here, I had no idea what to say. How do you tell your child that the father she mourned was standing before her? That he had watched her from the shadows, waiting for the right moment? That he was alive, but not the same man she remembered? Sophie's breath hitched, her eyes darting over my face, searching for something, some proof that this wasn't a hallucination. Her lips trembled. I took a shaky step forward. It's me, Sophie. My voice barely worked. It's really me. For a second, just a second, I thought she'd run, that she'd reject me, that the years apart, the grief, the betrayal, it was too much. But then, she launched herself at me, her arms wrapped around my waist, her body shaking with sobs. I held her like she was the only thing anchoring me to this world. Her fingers clutched at my jacket, like she was afraid I'd disappear again. They said you were dead. I whispered. But I came back. She squeezed tighter, and I felt her tears soak into my shirt. For the first time in a decade, I let myself feel it. The weight of everything I lost, and the relief of everything I still had. The flashing lights of the police cars cast long, shifting shadows around us. Ben stood off to the side, watching silently. Madeline sat on the curb, staring at nothing. Ryan was already gone, taken away in the back of a squad car, his legacy crumbling behind him. And me? I was standing in the middle of the wreckage of my old life, holding my daughter. I had won, but it didn't feel like victory. Not yet. I walked over to Madeline. She didn't look up. Her hands were clenched in her lap, her shoulders slumped in defeat. She was no longer the polished, powerful woman who betrayed me. She was just a broken shell. Madeline, I said. She flinched at my voice, but didn't move. Was it worth it? I asked. She let out a hollow laugh. I don't even know anymore. I nodded, staring down at her. I didn't hate her the way I hated Ryan. No, what I felt for her was worse. I pitied her, because in the end, she had lost everything. Her marriage, her daughter, her soul. I took a slow breath. I loved you once, I admitted. More than anything. She closed her eyes. A tear slipped down her cheek. I crouched down, so we were eye level. But that woman, I whispered. She died a long time ago. Her chin trembled. I stood up, turned my back on her, and walked away. I didn't look back. Ben was waiting for me. You did it, he said, folding his arms. He's done. I exhaled. Yeah, but it wasn't over. Not yet. Because now, I had to figure out who I was without revenge driving me. I had spent 10 years planning this. 10 years fighting to bring them down. And now, the war was over. So what came next? Sophie was waiting by my car. She wiped her eyes and tried to compose herself, but I could see it. The lingering pain, the questions she was too scared to ask. I knew those questions were coming. I had a lifetime to answer them. But for now, she just needed to know one thing. I reached out, cupping her cheek gently. I'm here, I promised. And I'm never leaving again. A shaky smile broke across her face. Good, she whispered. For the first time in 10 years. I let myself believe it. 6 months later, Ryan Carter was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Madeline disappeared from the public eye, a ghost of the woman she once was. Sophie started UCLA. She still had nightmares, still struggled with the weight of what she had learned. But she was healing. And me? I didn't just get revenge. I got my life back. And this time, I wasn't wasting it. Looking back on everything, I realized that revenge wasn't the real victory. Truth was, for 10 years, I let anger and betrayal define me. I let the pain of my past control my future. And I almost lost myself in the process. But standing here, watching Sophie rebuild her life, I understand something deeper. Life isn't about what we lose. It's about what we fight to keep. And for those of us who have lived long enough to see the weight of time settle on our shoulders, the lesson is clear. Don't let hatred consume you. Betrayal cuts deep, but holding on to it only lets the past win. Instead, we must focus on what truly matters. Family, love, second chances. If you've been wronged, seek justice, but don't let revenge steal your future. If you've lost time, lost trust, lost yourself, fight to reclaim it. Because in the end, the greatest revenge isn't destruction. It's living well. And that's exactly what I intend to do.